there's a lot of old and new coming together. So there's complexity coming as a result of that. And then of course the volume of data, the kind of data that we have is insanely large.
Hello and welcome everyone to the next episode of the Analytics India Magazine podcast Simulated Reality. Today we have with us the head of data products and analytics from Airtel, Siddharth Shah. Hi Siddharth, how are you today?
Doing well, yeah. Kashyap, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm glad you could come and make the trip all the way from Delhi. Thank you for coming here from all the way from Bangalore airport as well. A special mention for that. So we are going to talk about today about analytics at scale, and I think no better leader to speak with you who heads the analytics at Airtel. You have more than 50,000 employees, and it's a company that comes from a very traditional sector of telecom and media. But before we start with analytics at scale, can you help us establish what it means? So we all know what data analytics is, for instance, right?
Yeah.
What is the difference between data analytics, AI, or then data analytics at scale? Can we just first establish that difference and then maybe we move on to the topic?
Yeah, I'll probably just give you a little bit of context about what Airtel is, where it was a few years back, so that kind of helps you set up.
Yeah.
So as you understand, Airtel is a telecom company with 350 million customers that we serve in India. So that is scale from one standpoint. We also have a lot of businesses within Airtel. So like the prepaid business, postpaid business, broadband business and TV business, etc. Then we have an ads and financial services business. So there is complexity that comes by running so many different businesses. Then there is also complexity that comes because we've acquired a lot of these businesses over a period of time. So the systems are very different, right? So there is system complexity that comes along the way. We are also a telco that is about 25 years in the making. So there is a lot of old and new coming together. So there's complexity coming as a result of that. And then of course the volume of data, the kind of data that we have is insanely large. To give you a sense of the size, 40 petabytes of data, 2 trillion events every day. So that's the kind of data that we have. A lot of this data is on-prem, which adds another level of complexity. So taking a lot of these complexities in mind, trying to change the way the organization thinks of data and uses data is really the problem to solve at scale. That's the challenge.
Correct. I think that kind of settles the debate, or sets the context right. At that scale, right? Probably when we started off, or when Airtel was started off, or any traditional telco company, or any kind of, let's say, retail company, the digitization was highly the biggest obstacle to solve, right? But when it comes to I think before we go at analytics at scale, we have to come to some of the fundamentals. Firstly, there needs to be some set processes, some set infrastructure, people need to be upskilled, right? So there are multiple aspects to it. Where do companies start? Like when you entered Airtel office, right? I mean, what was your first problem to solve, and then how did you ease into setting up these processes and then building a team and then infrastructure, etc.?
Yeah. So see, I joined about Airtel in about 2020, right before COVID happened. It was about the time when Airtel was just starting to get into the digital world, right? We had set up a digital organization, the product organization. It was 1 year in the making, and data was just starting to become big for Airtel. Airtel traditionally has been very metric driven in the sense that people know their numbers very well, right? But to use all of the data that we collect and then for us to use this deeply for business purposes, for improving customer experience, that wasn't happening. When you think of trying to change a lot of things or whatever, how did we get into this, right? Lot of things have to happen at the same time in some ways, right? It starts with, is the leadership really inclined to doing this, right? And fortunately, that was also one of my primary criteria before I was thinking of joining Airtel. Like, is the leadership really inclined to kind of driving a change with data? And that seemed like the case, right? Top down, everyone wants to do this. And so that is a very big support, right? But keeping that aside, the first thing that you have to really understand is this is going to take a lot of time, right? So you have to have a mindset to say, this is 2020, let's take a 3-year plan and let's think of 3 years and solve this in the next 3 years, right? More often than not, if you're looking for very short-term escalated wins, that's not really going to happen, right? You'll always have quick wins, you'll always have, but it takes a lot of steps to kind of get to a really transformative output, right? Like you said, people have to change, processes have to change, systems have to change, old ways of working has to change. All of that takes time, and with the complexity that we just discussed, it takes a lot of time, right? So the first thing is to have a mindset. You have a mindset that you're going to take a few years and solve this problem. It's not a 3-month problem, it's a 2-year, 3-year problem. The moment you have this mindset, your teams have this mindset, your leadership has this mindset. So no one's looking for, get me a model tomorrow, right? The moment people stop doing that and start understanding what are the fundamentals that you fix first, I think that's your first win.
Okay.
Right? The next set of pieces are around people, right? The organization didn't really understand what an analyst could be, right?
Okay.
Very funnily, they used to call people who could write a query as a query writer. That was the title in the company of a query writer. The people who can go get into the data and plug this. This is 2020,
Okay.
right? So a lot of that push into the system to understand what an analyst could be. So then we are talking to every business, trying to explain to them, trying to show value, to say that, look, this is the kind of problems you're solving, but hey, listen, for example, we worked with the broadband business and said, look, shifting became a very big issue during COVID. Can I identify which customers are going to shift? How are they going to shift? What the shifting patterns look like? So I can arrest and understand what is the broadband behavior going to look like, right? So this is a very complex problem, generally speaking, and that's where people start realizing the value of having an analytics team and a data team versus a query writer, for that matter.
Query.
so that's the kind of those were the beginnings,
I
essentially.
think a lot of it, this sets context in a lot of way that in 2020, a company like Airtel was still having query writers, but then eventually they are understanding this thing. One of the things that I'm realizing is that you're saying your first job was evangelism. You wanted to tell that data and analytics can solve problems, probably this thing. You're saying that there was some support, but at the same time there was a friction, and you had to kind of fight your battles to kind of make people understand the value of data and analytics, which is the first step, you're saying, right? But at the same time, one of the things that you said, right, is that you need a 3-year plan.
Yeah.
In relation to that, when we're talking about this, let's just take the example of this, right? Like suddenly Gen AI has come. I'm sure in 2020 Gen AI was not as much as a buzz in this thing, and last year it was metaverse and blockchain, and this year it is this thing. I'm sure next year there will be another buzzword around. How clearly do you have to mention that, or how do you set boundaries with the leadership when you are promising results from driving transformation at scale, right, with the leadership? Because I'm sure some leader has come to you and said, you know what, hey Siddharth, please build me Gen AI. I want the best chatbot in the world to respond to customers.
Yeah.
If that's diverting from the vision or the 3-year plan, how do you kind of manage that? That must be a very tricky situation.
Yeah, it is. For example, one of the big programs we were running is the CLM program, which is essentially all the communication that we send to our customers, right? We send about 1.5 billion messages every day to our customers across various different touch points. And there's significant amount of system complexity, etc. We can talk about that. But at the end of the day, when we were taking on that program, right, that program has pretty much the entire company as a stakeholder, right, who's wanting to kind of send a message or communicate to the customer. So obviously there are too many voices that are talking about the program, right? And there is a very standard, most people read from outside that, you should think of next best action and recommendation engines and things like that. And we were at a stage where we didn't even have the data of messages that we were sending to the customer. Like we didn't even know what messages we were sending to Kashyap, right? So our systems were so broken in that sense. And here there were people who wanted to, create a next best action for the customer. We were not capturing feedback properly. We were not capturing customer cohorting, and none of that was happening, right? I think a large part of it for me was, again, leadership. My leadership has to be bought into the fact that this is not an easy job and there is a ton of work to be done. I think usually when the leadership is bought in, going downwards from there has been a lot easier, right? And that is one. The second is showing quick wins also becomes very important, Kashyap, because uh, invariably I'm not able to show, you know, a significant impact in the next quarter, in the next 2 quarters, so on and so forth, what happens is people lose faith in the program, generally speaking. And so trying to hold people by saying, look, we've got this. What you're talking about is probably 6 months or 9 months down the line. There are these 10 steps to get there. For example, you have to fix your data, you have to fix the auditing of the messages, you have to fix experimentation engine. We didn't have an experimentation engine on this messaging. If you don't have a lot of these, how will you even understand what? We didn't have a sense of which messages work better for which customers. So we don't have a lot of this, and then we are trying to leapfrog into something else. That's not really going to happen. And so trying to educate a lot of them about these 10 steps to be taken, the complexity of the situation, getting the leadership to buy in and saying, this is a 2-year journey for us on this particular piece, showing the first set of wins. This kind of has helped us stabilize.
Helps you not divert very
That's
far
right.
away from this thing. That's correct. And you just mentioned a couple of steps that you have to take over a period of time, right? There is some set of wins that you have to produce. Can we go a little bit more into what these set of wins look like, and what are some of the biggest bottlenecks you face when especially dealing with such a huge scale of data, right? And with the lack of infrastructure and digitalization. If you can help us understand what the journey looks like.
Yeah, so the way we've tried to do this is not to manufacture new problem statements. There are enough problem statements in the world that the business wants to solve for, right? You just have to have a very keen sense of, what are the problem statements that matter to them the most, right? One mistake we used to make a lot was we would look at the problem statements that they wanted to solve for yesterday, right? And then we'll try and go and solve that. What used to happen is it will take us 3 weeks, 4 weeks to solve a particular problem. And by then it's already too late in the business. So one of the things then we started doing is to say, listen, business, you're trying to solve for a problem 3 months down the line, or whatever, plan for the next 3 months, 6 months. Let me take a problem statement from there and help you solve that, as an example. For example, in customer experience, right? One of our, we get about 1 million calls a day from our customers who want to talk to us about some issue or some complaint that they have. Now, this is a fairly expensive proposition. And also from a customer experience standpoint, no one wants to wait for 10 minutes in the call center before they get connected. So ideally, they want digital options versus a call center, right, as a customer as well. But some of our digital journeys were broken. So one of the big challenges was to understand who's the customer who's going on the app and then going to the call center in, let's say, the next day or next 2 days or whatever that would be, and say, are you coming for the same issue, right? If you imagine, this seems like a very simple problem, but at the complexity of multiple channels connecting them together through a common identifier, at the scale of data that we operate, was not happening when the systems were very broken. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what we had to do was bring a lot of this data into one place, think through identifiers, instrument a lot of these identifiers ourselves, and then kind of go about it. But the moment you do this, you've given business a very good understanding of, okay, look, these are the 5 journeys to fix. The moment you fix this, your calls go down by about 10%. And this is straight through business impact, right? The moment you start doing some of these, the business starts buying into some of the work, because they had this problem for the last 10 years. They just could not solve it because to mingle up so much data and to kind of get an answer out was very hard for them.
Yeah.
Right. So get the first win, get the biggest problems that they want to solve. Make sure you have enough time to solve them, so that it's not a problem that once you solve, they're not, they're over it.
Yeah.
And then make sure that once you solve that, they're pushing through the implementation, so you see the impact. The moment that happens, people see the value and they realize how much of a difference your team can make.
Yeah. Let's divert a little bit to the talent aspect of it. We have talked about this before as well. Finding the right talent, especially is data and analytics talent, has become a problem for industries. Uh, but you're talking about analytics talent that needs to be able to deal with that kind of data.
Yeah.
You're talking petabytes of data in a day and
Yeah.
transactions that are generated as much as Google, right? What is that difference in talent, or what is that differentiating factor in analytics talent that you look for when hiring for a team like this, when you want to, you know, successfully do projects and achieve wins in such a small time? And how do you go about it in this? Because that must have been one of your major problems, hiring the right
Yeah.
talent to do analytics at scale. What's the
Yeah.
difference?
So Kashyap, the way we've also changed our paths in the last 3 years, right? There are different points in time where we've required different kinds of talent. So let me explain that. When we were starting off, right, our data was all over the place, you know. So to even get a journey stitched of a customer was going to be a very hard job, right? Um, Now, at that point, I am looking for people who are ready to clean up a mess of sorts, who are willing to kind of, you know, painfully take data from different systems and want to prove value, right? Um, who are willing to kind of say that, look, it will take 6 months to a year to even get to a certain answer, right? Who are okay to do a bunch of reporting to start with, a lot of data cleaning before they can even run a model. So, yeah, so I think that was essentially, you know, the mindset, right? What was also important there, Kashyap, was to, you know, make sure when we are interviewing, we are very transparent about who we are and where we intend to be.
What
So,
does that mean?
so it means that I was very open to say, look, if you're going to come here for the next 1 year, you're not going to build any model. You're not. So I would really set the bar so low, saying, look, you will have a lot of data. We will have fun with data, but we will do a lot of cleanup and mess cleanup. It will impact the business significantly, but you're not going to do any modeling today, not probably for the next 6 months to 12 months. And having
It's a very bad sales pitch.
I know, but after that, if you're coming in, then I've got you. You know, I think it's helped us because
Yeah.
the transparency helps in making sure we are setting the expectation right. The other person also, uh, you know, it's a breath of fresh air sometimes,
Yeah.
right? Um, and that has helped us in retaining talent as well, right? That has helped us in people really joining us on a mission versus, you know, coming in for a certain quick, you know, cool problem to solve.
Yeah, because they know where they are going to bear
Correct.
those fruits.
Correct.
They have
Correct.
that vision.
So
They're
there
working
are,
from scratch.
it naturally attracts a certain kind of talent, and obviously, you know, if this is not the kind of place you would like to be, then, you know, you would probably opt out of the interview process. And so that has helped us quite a bit. Fortunately or unfortunately, COVID had hit at that point when we were scaling, and there were a lot of layoffs happening at that point. So we had an abundant supply in terms of the number of candidates who wanted to come over, but we had to just make sure that we are getting people with the right mindset when they are coming in. You know, that was a very large part of the problem. Now, as we kind of moved from here to the next phase, right, then we needed really good problem solvers who could engage with the business and kind of really drive value in the business. Because Kashyap, what was happening then is we were able to actually solve the problem, but we were not seeing material impact in the business because the business wasn't really absorbing this and kind of translating that into impact, right? So we wanted people who could really learn the business, understand data, and then solve that problem. So then that skill set slightly shifted from people who could develop dashboards and reports to kind of people who could work with the business and get the domain understanding. And now we are getting slightly further from there to say, can we get also people with deeper science, data science understanding, so that we can go deeper from an analytical rigor standpoint.
Correct.
Generally speaking, that's generally been our thought process.
Correct. The leadership is ticked off. The talent is ticked off. One thing that really struck me before, you said your entire data is on-prem.
Yes.
That level of data, you don't take any Google cloud services. Cloud services.
We don't. We experiment on the cloud services, but most of our data is on-prem today.
Okay. How does that work out? Like in terms of, and what's that must be a huge problem to solve.
Yes. See, the challenge that we run into is is twofold, right? One is the challenge of elasticity, because tomorrow, let's say, we wanted to solve a problem on app churn as a problem statement. We require a ton of data for that and processing for that. We just don't have so much processing available to kind of run such a problem statement. So elasticity becomes a very large problem for us to solve. The second big problem is, Kashyap, the second big problem is that the data is on-prem can mostly just be accessed by data engineering teams, right? And maybe a few analysts here and there, right? That made us the choke point in terms of the number of requests that we were getting to solve problems, right? And how do we democratize from there was becoming the second big problem for us to solve. So that is essentially what we took on for the last 1 year and kind of transformed that to say, can my dashboards be democratized? Can my queries be democratized? Can my data sets be democratized? Can the entire platform just be democratized in a way that a business user can come and query and extract whatever they would like to extract, versus there being 3 more layers who can kind of do all of these pieces. So that's how we've kind of thought about it.
Fantastic. And I think the last piece of the puzzle that we have not touched is the technologies that we have worked with, right? What I'm sure you're working with some big data technologies, and when you started off, how was it? How are you seeing it evolve? What do you expect in the future, in the near future? And with some of the new technologies coming in, I mean, I'm talking about in the sense of generative AI and these kind of things, right, which will keep coming. Do you feel, how does the adoption or adaptation process rather work out for you?
Yeah.
And what do you envision in the future?
The way we've generally seen this, Kashyap, is there's a big bulk engine that is running, and then there are edges where we are experimenting, right? So for me, the big bulk engine sits on a lot of open source technologies, right? So, Hive, and then, Redshift pieces, and so, and, let's say Airflow for automation, Data Hub for cataloging, so on and so forth. So a lot of the standard components are open source, and we try and use a lot of open source because, one, we have a great community. Second, a lot of this works on-prem very nicely, right? And the lock-ins are, not
That's
painful.
The first time hearing.
Yeah, actually. So we've been surprised by a lot of that,
Okay.
and that's the last 1 year that we've kind of taken that on. See, the other challenge is a lot of the scale at which we operate, right? Not a lot of companies can provide us tools and technology to work at that scale. So sometimes we have to build ourselves, and that's why we rely a lot on the open source pieces as components as well. So that's how we have generally thought about this. A lot of the generative AI or usage on chatbots or usage on some of these pieces exist at the edges in some ways for us. So how can I take my customer experience problem statements and take that out and solve that through, let's say, speech recognition and a whole bunch of other pieces to kind of solve. That kind of sits in the edges, and that's how we've usually solved that, Kashyap. It's not still come to the core in the sense of that.
Fantastic. I think with that, I just want to ask if you have any last message for Airtel customers. I'm just kidding. Thank you so much, Siddharth, for coming on the podcast. It was great fun to understand what, I think it's very inquisitive to understand what a traditional company, telco, a 25-year-old company, and how they're building. I'm sure it must have been a very interesting challenge for you to solve. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Kashyap. Thank you so much for hosting us.